Welcome to Blue Jay Bird's Badass B Movies. I'm Blue Jay. I bring some sad news. American actor and karate master Chuck Norris died on March 19, 2026 from natural causes. He was 86 years old. But before he made kid-friendly movies in the mid-90s, and Walker, Texas Ranger, and became a meme of the 2000s, Chucky Boy appeared in a lot of B movies. After bumming around Hollywood since the late 60s, after ending his career as a karate fighter, and previously he was an Air Force police officer, Chuck appeared in several low-budget films as an extra until his friend Bruce Lee casted him as an American Karate Master Colt in his 1972 Hong Kong production of Way of the Dragon. The success of Way of the Dragon made him somewhat of a star in Hong Kong. He appeared in the 1974 low-budget kung fu film Yellow-Faced Tiger. It was released in a re-edited dub version in the United States at Slaughter in San Francisco in 1981. Chuck Norris got his big break and starring role in the 1977 drive-in classic Breaker Breaker, where he plays J.D., a good guy truck driver who seeks vengeance against corrupt law officials who target truck drivers. He was paid $5,000 for his part. The movie was shot in 11 days on a $250,000 budget, but it made over $12 million at the box office, and it made Chuck Norris into a star. A year later, in 1978, he starred in The Good Guys Wear Black. Chuck plays John T. Booker, a former commando with the Black Tigers who is now a college professor. Back in Vietnam, he was betrayed by a U.S. senator named Conrad Morgan, who sold him out to the NBA. Years later, the senator, now the Secretary of State, is being blackmailed to finish the job of eliminating the Black Tigers. Chuck followed that up with another B-movie classic, A Force of One. He played Matt Logan, a karate fighter who trains local cops in the art of self-defense. But he somehow gets involved in their business and that of a syndicate that is running drugs out of a sporting goods warehouse. 1980 brought The Octagon. Chuck Norris stars as Scott James, a retired karate champion, that's a stretch there, who was unsuccessfully being recruited into a secret ops mission by Lee Van Cleef after being attacked by a gang of ninjas. But eventually he's recruited by a wealthy woman named Justine Wentworth into infiltrating the secret organization that Cleef tried to get him into, that is training ninja assassins for special ops missions. His next film, Chuck starred in Eye for an Eye, where he plays a detective named Sean Kane, who's an undercover narc detective whose partner is killed while investigating a drug ring. After being reprimanded for giving a bad guy a flying lesson in front of several eyewitnesses, he teams up with his dead co-worker's girlfriend to bring down the drug kingpin. But she gets whacked as well, so he has to join forces with her father, and the two topple Christopher Lee's operation. 1982 brought the most unique and strangest film of Chuck Norris's early filmography, the horror action film Silent Rage. Chuck stars as Sheriff Dan Stevens, a Texas lawman who has to deal with John Kirby, a psychotic man who kills two members of his family before he's brought down like a rabid dog. But a couple of mad scientists led by Ron Silver use their experimental formula on the dying John, who comes back to life as a maniacal killing machine. Chuck will use his guns, hands, and feet to take out his unnatural opponent. His biggest film today was the highly budgeted Force Vengeance, which cost over $5 million to make. The movie was filmed in Hong Kong and Macau. Chuck stars as Josh Randall, the head of security for the Lucky Dragon Casino. He gets his hands and feet ready for action when he has to go out and get revenge for the death of his mentor, Sam Paschal, and his son. Chuck reached the apex of his karate cowboy action films with the 1983 production of Lone Wolf McQuade. The film promises a showdown between two of Hollywood's non-Asian karate superstars. Kung Fu's David Carradine co-stars as Raleigh Wilkes, and Chuck is Lone Wolf McQuade. Despite the badass poster and the exciting promise of an epic showdown, all we get is a boring, lame-ass film. But it would wind up inspiring his television show, Walker, Texas Ranger. Now it's 1984, and Chuck Norris needs a new gimmick. The cowboy karate fighter shtick was getting old, and after embracing Reagan's Americana, he became an even bigger star. Norris signed with the Cannon Group and made the 1984 action film Missing in Action. Chuck stars as Colonel James Braddock, a former POW from the Vietnam War who goes back to Vietnam which looks a lot like the Philippines, and fights the military in a plausible deniability mission to rescue POWs who have been held in prison for over 10 years. A year later, in 1985, the sequel, Missing in Action 2, The Beginning, was released, which tells the story of why Colonel Braddock was so keen on joining the secret ops mission to free POWs, which were illegally being held in a country that's supposed to be Vietnam but looks a lot like the Philippines. In reality, Part 2 was filmed before Part 1, or was it Part 1 that was filmed after Part 2? I don't know. A few months later, Chuck Norris released the Orion Pictures production of Code of Silence, in which he stars as Sergeant Eddie Cusick, a Chicago cop who has to deal with a local mafia and a group of crazy Colombian drug traffickers led by Henry Silva. Chuck finishes out 1985 with a big-budgeted canon production of Invasion USA, which is a right-wing prepper's fantasy come to life. Soviet commandos and Cuban guerrilla fighters invade South Florida. Chuck stars as Matt Hunter, a CIA agent who has to take on the invaders with the help of the National Guard. Perennial bad guy movie actor Richard Lynch co-stars as Rostov, the leader of the Soviet commandos. Cannon released another big-budgeted production in 1986, which co-starred Chuck Norris and Lee Marvin in the Delta Force. Chuck and Lee co-stars as members of the elite Delta Force. After a botched rescue of hostages in Iran back in 1980, the team decides to redeem themselves in 1985 with the hijacking of the American Trailways airline by Palestinian terrorists. Their group is led by Robert Forster, who plays Abdul Khafai, who by the film's end meets his demise at the hands of the Delta Force. Chuck's other film in 1986 was his first comedy, Firewalker, which co-starred Lou Gossett Jr. The two play treasure hunters who run into some wacky shenanigans in the Southwest and the jungles of Mexico. After taking a break in 1987, Chuck Norris returns to the cinema with the 1988 production of Braddock, Missing in Action 3. The Colonel goes back to Vietnam to search for his son Van from the evil clutches of General Kwok. The movie didn't do well at the box office, despite Cannon pushing it hard because they needed a big hit to stay afloat. The other film he made in 1988 was the action thriller Hero and the Terror. Chuck stars as Detective Danny O'Brien, whose nickname is Hero, and he has to tangle with a monstrous psycho woman killer, Simon Moon, played by the dude who was Non in Superman films of the 80s. The heroic cop defeated the terror before, and after Moon escapes prison, he'll have to do it again. The Cannon Group was on their deathbed and tried to recapture some of that old box office magic with the 1990 sequel Delta Force 2, Operation Stranglehold. Chuck returns as Colonel Scott McCoy, who leads his Delta Force team into South America to rescue hostages and to destroy the drug traffickers' operations. Most of the movie was filmed in the Philippines, despite taking place in a mythical South American country. The movie was a flop and was pretty boring as well. Still under contract with Cannon, Chuck Norris made the 1991 film The Hitman for the company. He stars as Detective Cliff Garrett, who is mortally wounded in a failed drug bust. He is given a new identity as Danny Grogan after he nearly dies at the hands of his co-worker, a crooked cop named Ronnie Delaney. 3 years later, Danny is a hitman and decides to play Yojimbo and pit two warring mafia factions against each other. Let's just say that they should have copied Yojimbo a little bit more. We close out Chuck Norris's career of B-movies with his last film with Cannon, the 1994 horror action film Hellbound. Chuck's co-stars with Calvin Levels as a Chicago police detective who stumbles across some supernatural intrigue when they come across Satan's lackey, Prosantinos, who's trying to bring his old boss back into the living world. Believe me, it sounds better than it truly is. Well, so long, Chuck. Thanks for all the memories, and I'll see you at the crossroads. Well, that ends this episode of Blue Jay Bird's Badass B-Movies. I hope to see you soon. Take care.